going to go through this, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about things that we've learned from the past and how we prepare for hurricanes up and coming this year. So every year, they do all their predictions. How are we going to do this year? How many storms? How many named storms? How many big storms? They go through all of that. And last year, I was really into it. Oh, we're going to have so many named, and it's only a matter of what happens here, right? So I kind of skipped over all of that. We had predictions. It's going to be like a medium year, and they gave their named storms. But it really is going to matter what impacts us here. And so regardless of how many storms they expect to have and how big they might be, they don't know where they're going to hit. So we're going to prepare like we are going to run into another Hurricane Ian. And our hope is that we don't, right? That's really where we're sitting. So we want to make sure that we're ready for it, but we want to hopefully come out of this season unscathed. So we did, Dawn, very nice. She put a nice little blurb in here, a message from me. After Hurricane Ian, y'all can read a little bit about, kind of just the experience that we had, obviously a Category 4 storm. It was a good opportunity for us to really, see how our team works. And every storm is a little different, so they're not all going to be exactly the same. And how we prepare might be a little different based on if we expect storm surge, extensive winds, or whether, we don't expect a storm to come and then it turns this way and hits us. So either way, we're going to be as prepared as possible for every storm that, could be potentially threatening our area. And as we learned through Hurricane Ian, and for those folks that were here during Hurricane Charlie years back as well, is that you just have to be prepared at all times because you don't know when it is going to come and hit. The beauty of the hurricane is that we do get a little bit of a prep time, so we know that we have several days to prepare as they are kind of forming that path, and we don't always know whether it's going to impact us or not, but we want to be as prepared as possible. So now is the time to start planning. So for you all as residents, some of this that we're going to walk through are things that you're going to want to do as residents to start preparing, thinking about hurricane season. Some of it is going to be what we're going to be doing, but we just want you to know about some of the things that we're going to be doing so you know how to prepare yourself. So I think it's important to think through this entire hurricane guide in this presentation today as we talk through it. Take this back and do a little bit of homework yourself and kind of figure out what your plan is for this upcoming hurricane season. Make your plan now, kind of have that in your back pocket and ready to go. And we'll talk some things like supplies, things that you probably want to go ahead and start getting now and having in your supply kit for the hurricane season. So we're going to jump into, it should be page 4 for y'all. So you're going to go through your table of contents into page 4. And you should have a section 1, resident readiness. Does that look right for everybody? All right. So resident readiness. So this is just sort of a little bit of a guide for y'all, a supply kit. You can always go out to places like FEMA's website, or I know some of the local news channels put their own little guides out there. Even Publix has a hurricane guide kit that you can find. But please take some of these items off of here and make sure that you have these in your kit. Some of the key things to take away from this, your water supply. You want to make sure that you have your water set up for you. We did send out a memo just recently. I think that went out this past week while I was out, but for water purchase, if you want to purchase water through us, we will buy it and we'll actually bring it to your apartment. So it makes it easy for you, but please make sure you have your water supply in your apartment. Our goal is that we do have water here on our campus. We have a backup supply, but we don't have the ability to, provide water for everybody for a week straight. So we want to make sure that you have your hurricane water supply in place in your apartments, and we will have our supply as well, so that we're prepared. You'll notice here 6 gallons per person is what the recommendation is. 3 gallons for drinking, 3 gallons for other things like flushing toilets, washing hands, all that other stuff that you might need to do. Now we also, during the time of the hurricanes, if we are feeling that we will be impacted, we oftentimes will pull out those big garbage cans and fill them with water, and we have other ways to get water in as well. So for things like flushing toilets and stuff like that, we do have some ability to assist if it comes down to it, but we don't want to rely upon that for the residents if necessary. The other thing about flushing toilets is, as much as we might have water on hand, sometimes that water doesn't want to go down the toilet when the sewer systems aren't working properly after a storm. So as much as we will prepare for that, we have to be prepared for some of those other items that might come up. Battery-powered radio, if you want to listen to the weather, that's always important, because we'll lose things like we found cell phones don't work the whole time. And you might lose anything if you have a plug-in radio or something might not work. So having that battery-powered radio is great to listen to the news forecasts. Flashlights with batteries, obviously a must. Please do not have candles in your apartment. I know a lot of times in homes you'll buy those big emergency candles that are supposed to burn for like 24 hours or something. Please don't have those. They're just a fire hazard for us. So flashlights the way to go. I will tell you, some of those little tiny LED flashlights, they're really small if you've ever seen them. I think you can get them at like Harbor Freight, Publix. They're very inexpensive and they are super bright and they're super easy. You just pop them in your pocket. So great way to have a flashlight on hand. Some folks that have tubs, not many people have tubs, but some folks that have tubs, you can actually take your drain out of the middle of your tub and you can put a stopper in your tub and fill it up with water. So I know there's not many folks here that have a tub in their apartment, but if you do have a true bathtub in your apartment, there is the ability to stop that up and fill it up with water. Manual can opener, very important if you have canned foods in your apartment, because electric can openers will not work after a storm passes. So please make sure that if you are anticipating cans, make sure they're either pop-top cans or you have a manual can opener. And then just some other things. So I'm skipping over a few of these items, but an important one is that if you do use oxygen, make sure that you have enough oxygen on hand. So some folks will order those additional cases or containers, cylinders, have them on hand, just in case the storm ends up extending out for several hours, as we saw during Hurricane Ian. We had 13 hours in the hallways, and we had probably about 2 to 3 days where folks would probably not be able to get here to deliver oxygen. So we just want to make sure that you have enough oxygen on hand that if you do need it, you've got it in your back pocket. So you can see some of the other items in here: hand wipes, sanitizer, battery-operated fans, some other items. So please just kind of look through this list. Make sure you have that put together. And then if you live on the 1st or 5th floor, we'll talk about this in a little bit about that vertical evacuation. But if you do live on the 1st or the 5th floor, you're not only going to want to have your supply kit pulled together for hurricane season, but if a storm is threatening us, you're going to also want to kind of pack that bag that if you have to evacuate vertically, either up or down, depending on the floor that you're on, to make sure that you have that additional backpack or bag that's ready to go, that has things like a pillow, a blanket, stuff like that with you, a change of clothes. That's always important to have, especially if you're not going to be right outside of your apartment, okay? And as we did see during Hurricane Ian, again, going back to that experience, is that we know that sometimes getting back into an apartment is not as simple as we think it will be after a storm. So if we lose windows again, we could be in that position where it's hard to get back in to get stuff out of your apartment. So having those additional items with you is helpful. We're going to flip to the next page, page number 5 then, or it will be on your opposite page there, section 2. So talking about relocation. So 1st and 5th floor residents, as I just mentioned, we do look at that vertical evacuation. So first and foremost, the 1st floor, the reason we evacuate the 1st floor is specifically with storm surge. So we're going to look at the storm and determine whether or not we think that we're going to be impacted by storm surge or flooding. And if you're on the 1st floor, we could evacuate you up, and if we do evacuate you up, it would go to the 3rd floor. Now, that would only be in the instance of a storm where we expected storm surge to be 10 feet or higher. That's usually what we're looking at, okay? And we do that in advance because if you did live on the 1st floor, it takes a little bit of time for us to get all of the residents off that 1st floor. And we do not want to be doing that when water is coming into our building, right? So we want to make sure that we get people up out of that 1st floor in plenty of time in case that we do take on water. Now, I will say during Hurricane Ian, they had anticipated some storm surge. They were, looking at that 10 to 15 foot range as they were kind of predicting the landfall. And obviously on the coastline, they got a lot more storm surge than we did this far inland. But we could have had the impact. And I will say that I went out at like 11:30 that night after the storm passed, and I did see the waters were up fairly high in the parking lot outside. Now the building's fortunately set up on they're built up on the ground a little bit. So if you ever recognize when you walk outside of east or west, you kind of walk downhill for a little bit. It's like a little bit of a slope down. And that's a great benefit for our community being built up a little bit, that our buildings might be surrounded by water, but we're going to be hopefully a little bit higher and drier than the surrounding area. So that being said, we do look at that first floor and could possibly move those folks just because of the storm surge. And then the 5th floor residents, we would move down to the 4th floor. And one of the reasons for that is as you get higher in the buildings, the wind speed picks up a lot more. So we not only have the issue of a higher wind speed on that 5th floor, but we also have the roofing challenges, which is many of you saw Gables East and even some parts of Gables West after the storm had some roofs that were torn off or damaged. And so our goal is to bring those folks down to that 4th floor. That's where all that hardened concrete and cement and the steel beams in the building keep everybody safe. And so as much as I know we get a little bit more packed into those corridors, it is definitely the safest place in our buildings, floors 2, 3, and 4, being in those corridors. And so that's really our goal, is to just make sure we're focusing on the safety of every resident in each of those corridors or those wings. Now again, depending on the storm, we might not evacuate that 5th floor. We might be saying, oh, it's going to be a category 1 or a category 2, and it would be okay to stay up on that 5th floor into the corridors. That would all be dependent on how that storm is coming in and what type of wind we expect and what type of storm surge we expect. So each storm we'll look at a little differently, and we'll give notice to the residents, accordingly based on what we anticipate with the storm. So just a note, because as we are moving from Hurricane Ian and the recovery efforts, I know some folks are looking at doing some impact glass windows, some that were damaged that will all automatically be replaced with that impact glass, others that some folks have asked to upgrade to that impact glass. One of the things to note is that even if you have impact glass in your apartments, we will still require you to come into the corridors, okay? Now people will say, well, why is that? My apartment is going to be safe, it's not going to get any damage, Well, a couple of reasons. One is those impact windows still can take some damage, so that's the first thing, is even though they're impact windows, they are not 100% foolproof against a storm. The second piece is that we have to really keep account and make sure that we know what's happening with every resident. And so when we don't have things like the ability to respond to pull cords and any type of an emergency in an apartment, we just want folks in those corridors where our staff will be to make sure that we're able to keep communication with all residents during that storm. And again, we're only going to come into those corridors during the height of the winds. Unfortunately, during Hurricane Ian, that was a long time. But as soon as we were able to get that all clear, where the winds had died down, we were able to get folks back into the apartments. That would be our goal again, so that we can evacuate into the corridors and then get you back into your apartments as quick as possible. So for those folks that are anticipating to do the hurricane impact glass, please note that we will still require everybody to come into those corridors if we do evacuate into the hallways for the height of the storm, okay? Section 3, a couple of options here. So Section 3 is going to give you some options, and we'll talk about Plan 1 and Plan 2 in these options. But before we get going, one of the things to just think about as we talk through this section here is, what is your plan going to be? So this is the point where you want to make a decision of what your plan is going to be and stick to that decision. Now, what does that look like? I'll just tell you right now, the two options are to leave the area, evacuate pre-storm, or stay here at Southport Square, right? So those are really the two options that you have, the choices that you have. And in thinking about that is, what is going to trigger you to say, I want to evacuate or stay? If that's a decision that you're going to make and say, maybe I will evacuate the area, would that be for a tropical storm, a hurricane category 3, or a hurricane category 4? What is it that you want to build into your plan? So you want to think about what that plan is and make that plan now and stick to that plan, okay? So we're going to talk through kind of the plans here, the two different options of what you have and what to expect if you choose one of these options. But before we get into that, I just wanted to share, we do have an LCS resident family hotline that will be set up if for whatever reason we lose communication here at Southport Square. And I say if for whatever reason we lose communication, because the first point of contact will always be Southport Square. We will run our phone lines as long as they continue to operate. We will answer those with the folks at the front desk. When we do lose phone service, then this LCS hotline will kick into effect, okay? So they usually have that hotline open as soon as a storm is impacting us, but they don't have all of the information that we have here at the community, right? So we're communicating with them as we can, but they don't always get the best updates, right? So what that means for you all is if you pick a plan and you decide to, let's say, evacuate the area before a storm, and you are planning to come back after the storm passes, you're going to want to call Southport Square before you come back, okay? Because we want to make sure that your apartment is okay, you can come back, we've got power, we've got water, all those things that you're able to come back to. And so calling Southport Square is your best first choice. And then if we don't answer at Southport Square, then this is the phone number. It's about halfway down that page under that section 3. You'll see bolded is that LCS Resident Family Hotline. That's the phone number that you can call, and they'll be able to provide you information as far as how we're doing and whether you can return back to the community or not, okay? And so we're trying to keep contact with those folks that are running that line so that they can share information with families that call in, okay? So the two options that you have, you're going to turn into page 6. Plan 1 under section 3 is going to talk about, that's that first plan. And that essentially is to relocate out of the county or state. Now, for those that saw things like Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Ian, those were gigantic storms, right? They weren't small storms. It wasn't like a Hurricane Charlie that was small and kind of focused on a certain region of the state. They kind of impacted the state as a whole. And so as you think through these plans is, we used to say, well, just go to the center of the state, right? That's always safe to go to the center of the state. Well, then we realized, no, it's not, because the center of the state gets hit just as much as some of the coastal areas. So if you're thinking about relocating out of the area, that is totally wonderful, acceptable. Probably the safest route for folks, right, is to get out of the area. I mean, if a storm is coming, get out of its path. If you have the ability to do that, if you have family members that live, out of the state or up in the northern part of the state, whatever it might be, that's a great option for you if you want to do that. And so just some of the things to think about as you're making that plan is to make sure that your vehicle is ready and that you leave with plenty of time, okay? Don't wait. During Hurricane Irma, if any of y'all saw on the TV, all those folks that were stuck in the traffic jam on the interstates and they were running out of fuel and it was a big mess and that storm went right up the middle of the state, right? So it's just a challenge to make sure that if you are going to evacuate, make that decision early and go. Now, I will tell you from personal experience, every time a storm threatened Southport Square, we jumped into our action and we, did all these things, and then the storm passed us and I was like, dang it, why did I do all of that, right? But you know what? It's better to be prepared, right? So if you evacuate and that storm doesn't even come our way, all right, so you're out a little bit of gas, right? Maybe some money.
You had a vacation.
You had a vacation, that's right, a better way to look at it. So, but the goal is that we want to make sure that we are prepared and ready to go. And we do have plenty of time to plan ahead of a storm because they give us a lot of notice, right? They're telling us 72 hours ahead of time or a week before it's coming up through the Bahamas, the Caribbean, it's coming this way, whatever it is, we know, right? So we want to take that action, make that plan, and make sure that we follow through and execute that plan and do it with plenty of time before it becomes too late. So as you'll see on this page, page 6, you can kind of follow through. You're going to still want to have that supply kit, that hurricane emergency supply kit pulled together so that if you do choose to evacuate, leave the area, that you can take all of those items with you because you might need it wherever you go. I know my wife and kids, they usually will head out somewhere. They've gone to Orlando, they've gone to the East Coast, they've gone different places. And they take their water and everything else because even if they don't get the brunt of the storm, they could get little side storms and they can still knock out power really easily. So it's great to have that supply kit with you, even if you're in a hotel or staying with family, they might not have power where you're at either. So to have that supply kit with you will be extremely important. Medication's extremely important, water, food, things like that. So please, if you do choose to evacuate, in here we also give you some different paths that you can take up through the state. So not all the main highways, because if you get on the interstates, they usually get backed up really quickly. But if you kind of go on some of the side highways, it's a little bit easier to get up through to the north part of the state. So we give you a couple little pointers or tips in here as well to help you out. So plan number 2, so we're going to go on to page 7. Plan number 2 under section 3 is going to talk about remaining at Southport Square. All right, so this will be the majority of you, I would imagine. Some people might choose to evacuate and go elsewhere. If you choose to stay here at Southport Square, we kind of want to just go through what to expect, right? Because it's not going to be ideal if we go through another storm. We know it's not comfortable, it's not ideal. It's, you know, kind of a situation where we keep everybody safe, but it might not be the most comfortable spot to stay. So as we go through this, if you do expect to stay at the facility, as we talked earlier, that if you live on the 1st or the 5th floors, you might be required to evacuate to a different floor based on what, you know, the need is at that time. You also will be asked to move into the corridors if the storm winds kick up to a high enough level that we feel we need to get out of the apartments, and we would, you know, share that. But that might mean sitting in the corridors for several hours or many hours in the instance of Hurricane Ian, right? So we know that that can be a long time depending on how slow that storm is moving and how big that path of wind force is. So just some of the expectations. Please make sure that if you do stay and we're evacuating folks into different floors or corridors, please make sure you stay in your building during that time, because we need to account for everybody, and we will be moving folks into specific hallways and corridors. So we will explain to you, you know, to either stay in your wing or to go to a different wing, and we do that based on how many people are in each wing. So if we have a wing that may be less habited at one particular time, we might put more people into that wing that are coming from another floor. Okay, so we'll give you all of that information as we move through that evacuation process internally. And then sheltering in place on page 8, kind of at the top of page 8. So sheltering in place, you know, the goal is safety and security during the storm. That's really what we're looking at. We just want to make sure everybody is safe. I feel really confident that when we went through Hurricane Ian, we kept everybody safe. Was it ideal? No, it was not. But we did keep everybody safe. And so our goal is to make sure everybody is safe. One of the things that we did learn after Hurricane Ian is that after a storm passes, make sure everybody stays in the building until we have the opportunity to go out and assess kind of what the damages are and whether we can go out. Because we found there were down power lines around here, we found a lot of debris on the ground, and we found a lot of hazards out there. So please make sure that after a storm passes, that we're not just, you know, kind of hightailing it out of the buildings to go check out all the damages. I know it's always fun and great to see that, but it's definitely a hazardous situation. We learned not only from being out on the property with power lines and trees and all of that other stuff that had taken place, but we also had hazards in the building with the lanais that had, you know, blown off of the building. And so those were some of the things that, you know, we were trying to assess as quickly as possible and just, again, keep everybody safe. So it is all about safety during those storms, during those times. And then just some things to think about if you do decide to stay. And we don't want those corridors to get like too overloaded, but we want you to be comfortable as you can be in the corridor. Love the storm that's like, you know, an hour or two and it blows by, right? You can get in the corridor and get back into your apartment. But when it's, you know, 13 hours or 20 hours or whatever it might end up being, we want you to be prepared as well. So we gave you some suggestions for hallway supplies. If you want to bring a couple of games or something, make sure you have some medications for the day, any type of snacks, water. I know we were able to do some meal service during the corridors of Hurricane Ian, so we were able to provide for some sandwiches and stuff like that. And so we will absolutely do everything we can to continue that meal service, but that is not guaranteed. That's all dependent on what equipment we have available and the ability of staff to be able to, you know, come in and make those meals and get those out to y'all. So we'll continue to work on making it as easy as possible for you in those corridors. But just a couple of other items, blankets and pillows, those are always nice to have in the corridors because it's going to get, you know, sometimes it could be a long time. And again, we can gauge that based on the size of the storm and the speed of the storm as to how long we might be in those corridors, but we don't always know that for sure, okay? Irma and Ian were great examples of just a very slow-moving storm, very large size, and so it took a long time for those storms to pass over us until we could get back into the apartments. All right, pet owners in the house here. So section 4, pet information. So we're going to get into pets. So this is at the bottom of page 8 if you're following pet information. So a couple of things is that, one, we know we have dog and cat owners here. We have a couple of birds as well. As we are kind of moving into prepping for the storm, some things to make sure that you have available and ready to go. So one is make sure that you have a carrier or some type of a crate for your pet. And with that, please make sure that it is a large enough crate that your pet has room in it to be there for several hours. We did see during Hurricane Ian, we had folks that had like the little carriers for their pets that basically just allowed for their body, but they couldn't really even turn around in the carrier. And it just wasn't an ideal situation, especially for the amount of time that the pet was going to be, in that room. So please make sure if you do have a pet, you have a crate that's large enough to accommodate. And you're going to want to make sure that you have things like food and water ready for your pet. If you need kitty litter for a cat, for a dog, having additional waste bags for the dog, leash, collar, all the vet records for your pet. I bumped into somebody today that actually, she was very prepared. She has a Ziploc baggie, she has a picture of her pet, she's got all of her vet information and shot records and everything, all in a little Ziploc bag. It's right there with her name and information. So just some great things to have for those of you that are pet owners. We will require for pets to come into a location that we determine. We'll pick a spot that we will keep those pets. We're going to look for a place that might be a little bit more secure than an apartment this time, because we recognize that there's windows in an apartment, and that obviously opens up for potential issue in those apartments. So we'll be looking for some different places that we might put pets in this next go-round. However, we will require for all those pets to come into one area if we are being threatened by a storm, and we are going to anticipating evacuating into the corridors. And we do that for two reasons. One is that we want to make sure that the pets are safe. We have somebody that's looking after them. We have staff members that will be assigned to watch over them. But two is because if for whatever reason we do make the determination that we must evacuate either before the storm or after the storm, we want to make sure those pets are ready to go and we can load them onto the buses with our residents and get them to the right place. So making sure that your pet is identified properly with your name and apartment number and their information will be critical. Moving on to page 9 at the top, it carries on with a little bit of pet information. It talks about some of the things that you should have in packing your pet up, but it also has an area that talks about, there's a website here, www.petswelcome.com. And this is a website, Dawn found this I think a couple of years ago, and it's a website where you can actually go on and find pet-friendly places to stay. So hotels, places like that. So if you do choose to evacuate and go out of the area with your pet so that you can stay with your pet, you can find places that will allow your pet to stay with you. Great opportunity for you to remain with your pet and kind of get out of harm's way and just be safe and not have to deal with the storm here. So trying to give you as much information as possible so you can make the best decision for your needs here. So in the middle of that section, or in the middle of that page under section 5, it talks about mandatory evacuation. So there are times when Charlotte County might tell us that we have to evacuate. Now, during Hurricane Irma, I believe that they wanted us to evacuate during that storm, and we did not evacuate. During Hurricane Ian, they did want us to evacuate our healthcare center, and we chose to stay because we felt it was safer than the location that they were going to send our residents to. It ended up being the right decision, but there might be a time where Charlotte County says we must evacuate, and we will follow their orders based on storm surge or wind speed or things like that. So as we go through that, we just want all of our residents here to know and understand that if you do choose to stay here at Southport Square with us during a storm, and we are required to evacuate under a mandatory evacuation, we would make sure that we got you evacuated to whatever locations we are going to go to. Now, we have a couple of options. Some of our options include sister communities that we have agreements with for transfer. So if, for whatever reason, the storm was maybe coming from the south, we could go north up to the Bradenton-Tampa market. We could go up into the Jacksonville area. We've got folks, up in different places. We also know that there might be times when we would evacuate to a hotel. So some of the larger hotels, we could get a bank of rooms and evacuate folks up there. Either way, it will be our responsibility to make sure that we get you to a safe location and we have transportation for you to that safe location. That being said, we just want to make sure that you are ready to go with your bag, your overnight bag, your kit, right? Clothes, things like that. Toothbrush, toiletries, medications, all those things that are important to take with you. So that's always a good thing to have. You just leave it right in your apartment, right by the door. So if we do end up needing to evacuate, you can grab it and go. All right. So that's just one of the pieces that we could run into that issue. Section 6 under our food service plan. So again, same page, page 9. It just talks about what we plan here. So we do try to provide meals throughout the storm as best we possibly can. We have a lot of vendor agreements in place that we will stock up prior to a storm, and we have agreements in place that will get food flowing to us immediately after a storm as soon as the roads are cleared and able for a truck to pass. But during that time, we do ask that you make sure that you have food in your apartment that you can last for roughly for that 24 hours after the storm. We'd like for you to have about a 3-day supply of food, which is fairly simple if you get into some canned goods, crackers, things like that, that all the kinds of stuff that we'll keep. We found this last storm, we had a refrigeration truck out behind Gables East, and did anybody see that refrigeration truck right after the storm? We were very fortunate the tree did not fall directly on the truck. It fell right next to the truck. And it almost blocked the access to get in and out of the truck, but we were fortunate enough that the tree fell next to it, and we still had all of our refrigerated food available to us so that we could start food service again after the storm. But those are some of the things that, you prepare and you plan as best you can, but, things happen and you got to react to them. So we were able to make it through that, but we want to make sure that folks do have enough food in their apartment and they are ready to go. So please make sure to have, a minimum of 3 days of food in your apartment for you, and if you have 2 of you in the apartment, make sure there's enough for both of you, or you'll be looking at each other like, the roasted turkey on Thanksgiving Day, right? All right, supplies. So we do keep a 3-day supply of food on hand. Through storms, we will bulk up. We definitely move our stuff out of the buildings into the refrigeration truck. We have a lot of other meal capacities here that we have things like sandwiches, the basics, soups and sandwiches become, a staple if it comes down to it. In our health center, we actually have if y'all are old military folks, the MREs, their meals ready to eat. So basically, it's almost like a just add water type meal, and they store forever. I'm sure they taste wonderful. But we do have those. That is really our hurricane supply, and that will make sure that we have enough food to make sure that folks can get food, get nutrition, but at the same time, again, won't be the ideal conditions. We'll want to make sure that we can get back into food service as quick as possible. So it does talk about our food service plan. And then just so you know, we will continue, so moving on to page 10, we will continue to try to provide those meals as we did during Ian. We were able to provide for some meals in the corridor. That might not always happen. It's going to depend on the staffing that we have available and the supplies and the equipment that we have functioning during that time, okay? So just please be prepared and plan accordingly. We'll try to do everything we can to provide the service, but it might not happen exactly as you would hope or anticipate. Going on to section 7, staffing. So page 10. So one of the things that we work on very diligently in our early hurricane prep process is identifying our A team, our B teams, and our C teams. Our A teams are folks that come in and hunker down during the storm with you all and make sure that the building stays safe and we operate through the storm. Our B team responds immediately after the storm to allow our A team to go home and rest while they come in and alleviate them, and our C team is kind of that cleanup crew on the back end. So we do these separate A, B, and C teams so that we know that we have enough staff here. But what that means is that we might not have all of the same functions happening during a storm. So if we get into a storm, please don't expect housekeeping to come and clean your apartment because it's your cleaning day. And we might not be able to come and change a light bulb in your apartment right away if one burns out. Those are just some of the realities of a storm that we just have to recognize and understand. That we'll do everything that we possibly can to answer your questions and to get you in a safe setting during a storm, but that we might not have those additional services going on. In addition to that, please be patient with us and our staff, because not only are we trying to do everything right that we feel is according to our plan and appropriate, but we are also under a lot of stress ourselves when we're in the middle of a storm. So we're trying to make sure that you all are safe and you're sound and that we have everybody accounted for. At the same time, we might not be able to spend a lot of time speaking with you about certain issues. We will absolutely try to keep up with communication as far as, maybe updates on the storm or anything that's happening. But we don't always know. I know we got a lot of questions during Hurricane Ian. How much longer is it going to be, right? And we didn't know the answer to that. I was, texting my wife, and I was like, "Oh, is it almost past?" And she's like, "Well, you're just in the eye right now, so no, it's not. You got plenty of time." So unfortunately, as we are kind of moving through that, we don't always know how much more time it's going to be. We will try and gauge that, but we just want to be prepared and know that it's not going to be a comfortable situation during that storm. And then section 8 at the bottom of that page 10, talking about Southport Square as a refuge. So please, if you have family, friends, neighbors from back when you lived outside of Southport Square, please make sure that you're not inviting them in here to come stay with you during the storm. We are not a shelter. We are not open to the public for folks to come and stay here. They're going to have to make their own plans and own arrangements. Now, we do take in our staff that are part of that A team that are going to be responding here, and they might bring some of their family with them because we want them to be here working, and we want to make sure that we're keeping their families safe because they're not able to be at home with their families. So you might see some of our staff members' families here, but we ask for residents that you do not bring in family, friends, neighbors, anything like that. We can only account for the residents that we have here. We know that we're limited on space when it comes to a hurricane and going into those corridors, and the more bodies is the more heat, and the more people is the less space that we all have. So please make sure that you're letting folks know that if they are needing to seek shelter, they can find another place. I will tell you, during Hurricane Irma, because it was so large, and I think toward the end, people were starting to realize, oh my goodness, I'm not in a good place. And we had folks knocking on our doors trying to get in from the apartment complexes, neighbors down the road. And we just, unfortunately, we have to turn them away, but, we really just can't take folks in. We've got to make sure that we're taking care of our residents first and foremost, so. All right, moving along, page 11. So this is under section 9, emergency generator. So just a show of hands, do we have any new residents here that did not go through Hurricane Ian with us? I think we've got a few, right? Yep, a couple. Okay. All right, thank you. So, just so y'all know, we have emergency generators here in our buildings. We have one in Harbor Health, we have one in Gables West, and one in Gables East. They all function a little differently, okay? So Harbor Health is a fully generated building, which means that if we lose FPL power, our generator kicks on and it feels like we're still on FPL power. So that's wonderful for our folks that are in the greatest need for healthcare and care needs. So they really don't experience a difference or a change. Unfortunately, in our Gables West and Gables East building, if we lose FPL power, our generators do kick on, but it's very limited power that we have in the buildings, okay? And so for those of you that went through Hurricane Ian, you saw, kind of what it looked like before they got the big generators hooked up and kind of got some of the power back up and running. But there's things like we have very limited power, which includes things like some lighting in the corridors. You will not have any power in your apartments. There is some lighting in the corridors. We have our elevators on our emergency generators. We have some kitchen equipment that can still function. It's not a lot, but we do have some gas-powered equipment in the kitchen that can operate, so stoves and cooktops and things like that. Our fire alarm and assurance systems are hooked up on the generator. So our goal is that if there's a fire, our fire alarm is still going to alarm, and we found that out in Gables West. Sure thing, it did alarm when the alarm went off. And our assurance systems will still work on generator power. So we want to make sure that when we go back into the apartments that we still have the ability for us to see pull cords and check-ins and things like that, because we just want to make sure everybody's safe. Business phones and a couple of additional outlets in each of the buildings that we can use for oxygen and other medical equipment, things like that. So it's very limited power in those buildings. We were fortunate after Hurricane Ian that the blue team was able to get some of those larger generators, bring them in and connect them. I know it wasn't, the perfect, plug and play. It didn't go as smooth as we had hoped, but we did get some additional power. So we were able to see things like resident apartments being powered a little bit more and stuff like that. So as we move through some of that, we'll try to make it as best as possible, but we can't guarantee and assure that that will happen every single time. So our generators right now are set up to run very limited items. No air conditioning in the buildings, by the way, unfortunately. So moving along, so section 10 really just kind of gives you an idea of our building specifications. This isn't really for any kind of planning purposes, but it just kind of tells you, how our building is constructed. So this is at the bottom of page 11. And so just so y'all know, our buildings, they are total concrete and iron building, right? So we have some iron support structures as well as concrete slabs that were poured. And so as you get into like the rooftops, you'll see we've got the wood trusses and the wooden plywood with the shingle on top and all of that. So you'll see that obviously in Gables East after the storm. You saw a couple of those gables kind of got peeled back a little bit. But if you go down right underneath that, it's concrete. And so the corridors of our building are really that core of the building. That is really where we have the most rigidity of the building and the most safety of the building. So that is why we go into those corridors. The exterior walls are just as strong. The only challenge is that you have glass, and whenever you have glass and windows, you have the ability for stuff to break. And so that's really why we come into those corridors, to keep folks safe. Now you can say, well, there's windows at the end of the corridors, and there's windows, in the middle common area spaces. And yep, we have the potential that those will break too. And they did. We saw it happen on the 5th and the 4th floors in some areas. And so, those are just some of the things that we have to be able to account for. But we want to make sure that we're all kind of in that core center of the building, because it is a very well constructed building and will hold up to, as we saw, very extensive wind forces. All right, moving along, page 12. So we're getting to the end of this. I'll just tell you, I know it seems like there's a lot more pages, but some of these go fast after this last section here. So page 12, getting into section 11, talking about the command centers. So we do set up a command center in each of our buildings. For those of you that were here during Hurricane Ian, you probably saw that we had, kind of one person that was responsible for each building, and then we had multiple people that were kind of dispersed through the building. So you'd have a representative on each of the floors that was there to, kind of help folks navigate, and then we had a lot of support crew in the buildings as well. And so our goal is that we want to have that central command center set up so that we know that each of the associates can go right back to that one command center, which usually is at the front desk of the building, and get information or provide information or take information back to the residents on the floors. We would ask that once we are evacuated into the corridors, that you stay in your area and wait for that associate to come around to your corridor that's kind of patrolling in that area. If you have a question or a concern that comes up, they should tell you obviously where they are on that floor, where they'll be sitting, and then they should be making rounds periodically as well. But our goal is that all that information can kind of come through those command centers. We can continue to run and operate those buildings and be able to be in contact with each of the buildings through the height of the storm. So our goal is that we have those command centers. They are specifically set up for the staff to be able to get information. But if you have questions or concerns that are taking place during the storm, we'll make sure that those folks on the floors are there to help and assist with those concerns or needs. And then section 12, we're going to just talk a little bit about overall hurricanes in general. So hurricane season, June 1st through November 30th. Now there's been a lot of talk about extending that season. Anybody heard of this so far, right? They're saying like maybe starting the season earlier, like May 1st potentially, and maybe running it until December 31st. There's been talk about this because they're saying that they're seeing storms earlier and later in the season. So whether that will happen or not, we don't know, but we just want to be prepared and ready. We have seen storms pre-June 1st. Usually they're like tropical depressions or tropical storms here in Charlotte County. It's happened. And so, there's potential that you could get storms early enough. For those folks that monitor things like the NOAA website, or obviously you're watching the news, they're going to tell you when something's happening, regardless of what month it is, right? We're going to know something's coming, and we want to be prepared for it. So as we walk through this, there are some things in here to just talk about the different types of storms. So we talked about planning for different storms based on wind and storm surge. And so they have different categories for storms. There's a category 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's that whole Saffir-Simpson scale that they use. And there's been a lot of talk about how to rate storms nowadays because they say they have to take the impact of the storm surge into account and not just the wind forces. Now, a lot of times those two coincide, but not always. Okay, so what they're saying is that they find the storm surge causes a lot more damage and more hazards than the wind speeds do. And so they're driving a lot of those categories based on the storm surge itself. So a category 1 storm is the lowest. So you have tropical depression at the lowest end, a tropical storm, and then when you get into hurricane level, category 1 is the lowest rating, that's at 74 miles per hour, and category 5 is the highest. They consider a major hurricane at categories 3, 4, and 5. And if you flip over to page 13, under section 13, you're going to see the storm categories there. You'll see the wind speeds of each of the storm categories. I'm not going to go through all of this in detail for y'all because I know you can read it, but familiarize yourself again with the storm scales, the systems, and what it means to be in a watch and a warning, okay? Because one of the things you have to think about is that a watch is kind of like, you're thinking that there could potentially be something happening in your area. A warning means something is pretty much going to happen within the next 36 hours, okay? So you want to make sure that we know that watch and that warning. And that's the same for things like tornadoes, hurricanes, anything like that. They'll usually say we're under a tornado watch or a tornado warning, or a hurricane watch or a hurricane warning. Those are great to know the difference between a watch and a warning, because a watch means we're on the lookout and prepared. A warning is we need to take action and do something now, okay? So those are some of the things, and we put a lot of information on here. This came from the NOAA website and some other weather websites, just to give you an idea of some of the terms that might be kicked around on those meteorologists as they're talking about the storms, so you have a good idea of what's happening. And then section 14 here gets into helpful information. This is on page 14. I cannot encourage you enough, if you have not signed up for Alert Charlotte, go out and sign up for Alert Charlotte. I'll tell you a little bit about how Alert Charlotte works. So there's a website here. It's alertcharlotte.com. It's right in the middle of the page there. So if you want to go to the website and look at it, alertcharlotte.com. But what you do is you can set up for notifications to be sent. If you have a smartphone or a cell phone, they can send you a phone call, a text message. If you have email, they can send you an email. I don't think they'll send you anything in the mail, but they will definitely give you something electronically. But Alert Charlotte, what you do is you go in and you sign up with whatever format you want to receive their alerts, and you can choose what alerts you want to get. So you can say if you want to get a hurricane alert, if you want to get a tornado alert, if you want to get a severe weather alert. Okay, that could be anything from a thunderstorm to a windy day, right? Or you can say a small craft advisory if you have a boat and you're thinking about going out. Or mosquitoes, there you go, mosquitoes, yeah. So Alert Charlotte, you can pick and choose what you want to get notified for. But it is a great setup because I will tell you, I can be laying in my bed at night and all of a sudden my phone will go off and tell me that there's a tornado watch going on, right? And so that's something I probably want to know in the middle of the night. If I was going to sleep through that, I might want to know that there's a tornado watch in the area. So Alert Charlotte is a great system. If you have the ability to sign up for that, I would strongly encourage you to go out and sign up for Alert Charlotte. And again, that's at alertcharlotte.com. That is specific to Charlotte County, by the way. So if you are interested in another area, you'll have to find a different site to do that, but Alert Charlotte will give you some great information. And then again, on the bottom of that page 14, we've got a lot of other websites on there. I know the websites that I use the most is the National Hurricane Center website. That's the one that says www.nhc.noaa.gov. That website is all of kind of the hurricane monitoring. So if I know that there's a hurricane, you can go out there and see the updates. I think it's every 3 to 4 hours they put that new update out there, and you can kind of track that as the storm moves, regardless of where it is. If it's off the coast of Africa, you can see it and watch it come across. So it's a great website to be able to kind of track and trend the storms as they might be impacting our areas. The next couple of pages, so page 15, again, is going to give you some additional information, local TV stations that usually will be airing information, local radio stations that you can tune your radio to. It talks about emergency shelters. So there are emergency shelters that Charlotte County will open, but please note that if it's a Category 3 storm or higher, they usually will not have any shelters open. So if you have friends or family in the area that are going to need a shelter, please just make sure they know and understand that if it's a significant storm, they might not be able to find a shelter here in Charlotte County, okay? Just because they don't have the capacity from a wind speed standpoint and a storm surge standpoint to take on folks into some of those shelters. And then you can always go and check the Charlotte County Emergency Management website as far as what sites they do have available or where they're at. So if you're trying to help a family member or direct a family member to a shelter, you can help them. There's a website in here about halfway down the page, charlottecountyfl.com/emergency/refuge-sites.asp. All right, coming into the home stretch, page 16 gets into important contact information. So this, hopefully you won't have to call many of these numbers because we should be able to take care of most of the stuff here on our campus. But if you do need to call any local emergency management, we have a lot of the phone numbers here for you. On this page, you'll also see our main Southport Square number, which should be the number that you call for any information, or if you've evacuated and are interested to come back, that would be the number you would call before your return. If you don't get an answer at Southport Square because our phone lines are down, you can call the LCS emergency hotline, which is on there as well. That is at 888-214-8464 number. You probably want to also share that number with your family members or friends that might check on you after a storm, because if they call Southport Square and our phone lines aren't working, they might get a little concerned, and then they can call that LCS hotline. So those numbers are available for you. Helpful information, some additional phone extensions for folks. This is on page 17, phone information for folks here on site if you need to call anybody specifically. And then page 18 is just going to get into the Atlantic tropical storm names that will be used this year in the 2023. Please make sure that you're taking every storm seriously. I know as much as it's a hassle to prepare each time a storm comes our way, it is way better to be prepared than not prepared. So taking the time right now to set up your emergency supply kits and your backpacks that you might have an overnight bag, things like that. Make sure that you have that ready to go, because you just never know when that storm is going to threaten us here. We just want to be prepared. We have in here some additional things if you want to track a storm, for anybody that's kind of like that storm nerd, if you will. Is that what they call them, storm nerds? I'm a storm nerd. I kind of like tracking that stuff. But you can track it right here, plot it on your paper, and kind of watch the storm path. They also do that online. We've got the ability for you to put notes. So if you want to keep this, I find that during a storm, I print everything ahead of time, because you never know if computers will work during a storm. But I print everything, and I try to keep all of my notes within my packet. So I usually will have like my hurricane guide, which is way bigger than this one. But I'll have my hurricane guide and a lot of my written notes on it and stuff. I just have that printed and ready to go. So we gave you the opportunity to write some notes in here. And then one of the most important pieces in the back, and I think you'll notice it should be the last page of your packet, is a resident evacuation form. It should be one of the last pages in the packet. This resident evacuation form, so for those of you that are interested or are thinking that you're going to evacuate if a storm does threaten us, please make sure that you have this filled out. You can update it, each storm. If one comes and you're thinking, I'm going to stay this one, but next time I'm going to evacuate, that's fine. Please just make sure you have this filled out, because we want to make sure that we know where you are so we can account for you if you do evacuate after a storm, and we just want to make sure that you're safe as well. So please make sure that you have this. If you are going to evacuate, fill this out, make sure the front desk gets it, and then we know that we don't have to account for you here during the storm, but we'll want to make sure that we touch base with you after the storm. Okay, does that make sense for everybody? All right, I think that is it with the pages of information. So I'm going to open it up for questions now, and I'm sure we'll get some good questions here, and hopefully I'll have the answers. Yes, Bill?
During Ian, Jerry Faith was a guardian angel for people who need oxygen and things of that nature. Would Debbie be prepared to do that, or is there somebody about to replace Jerry?
Yep. So great question. So the question comment was that during Hurricane Ian, Jerry Faith was in the Gables East building, was helping folks that had things like oxygen needs or other medical equipment. So through our resident services department, we are still looking for Jerry Faith's replacement, but Debbie Link works in that department as well. We have a number of other nurses that work within our buildings. So in Innovative Home Services, Beth Mangan is a registered nurse as well. So we do make sure that we have a nurse assigned to each building and that they're responsible in overseeing kind of those folks that need some additional medical care. So making sure that you have enough of your medical supplies is extremely important, but they will be there to help and assist anybody that might need assistance with oxygen and other items. So yes, we will have that coverage through somebody within each building. Yeah. Yes, Bill?
Just one comment. The fire doors were slamming, and some of us had to stand there and hold the doors shut. Is there something that can be done to deal with that, other than having maintenance people come up and
Screw it in, yeah, sure. So, yeah, it's a great question. So the question was, during Ian, because some of the windows broke in some common area spaces, the fire doors were, opening and closing and banging very hard in those corridors. And so, do we have a solution for that? So Pat and I have kicked this around a little bit. Pat Brown and I have kicked this around. One of our challenges is that we can't put anything on those doors that would latch them closed or secure them, because that would be a violation of our fire standards in the building. The fire marshal would not allow us to do that. So we've been trying to figure out a temporary way that we can get those closed. What we did during Hurricane Ian was we actually had to drill them shut, put screws in the ground to close them, to secure them. Because unfortunately, the doors come together, but there's nothing to keep them from opening back up, right? They're meant to be a fire door, not a wind door. And so it doesn't serve the purpose of stopping that wind. So we've looked at a couple of items or solutions, things like sliding locks that would kind of go down into the cement to kind of lock them down. We've also talked about some additional like an apparatus that we could put on the door that would actually secure it together once they come closed. So we will have a solution before we come into our first storm, but we're trying to find something that's not going to be a direct violation with the fire marshal. So
one suggestion, possibility, is put a hydraulic door closer on it.
Yeah.
It'll fly open, but it's closed.
Sure. Yeah.
So it'll be a controlled close.
Sure.
So you're not jeopardizing.
Yep. It's a great point. So we'll look at that as well. I think one of the things that we really want to look at is if we can secure them somehow, like get them closed and secure them, but that they're openable in the case of a fire. I will tell you that if there's a hurricane on us and there's a fire in the building, we're going to have a real issue. I thought about that as the fire alarm was going off in Gables West during the storm, and I thought, boy, if we have to evacuate outside, I don't know what we're going to do right now with 150 mile an hour winds. So just one of those things that you hope that those things don't happen simultaneously, but that potential is out there. So we would definitely compartmentalize within our building. If for whatever reason we did have a fire, our buildings are set up to compartmentalize those fires, and we can manage for several hours by keeping doors closed and working through those fire doors. That's the beauty of the way that this building is built. But definitely a great suggestion. We'll have to come up with a game plan before it comes time for a storm again. What other questions do y'all have? Yes?
For those of us who work in the healthcare field, I know normally you discourage us from helping for liability reasons, but how is that going to work there in this situation like you have with Ian? Do you encourage us to be available as a resource or to help people or anything? Since technically we're not licensed.
Sure.
In my case, I'm a respiratory therapist.
Okay, yeah. So it's a great question. So the question is, if you're a medical person, maybe retired or previously had medical training experience, could you be of assistance or help during a storm if folks needed it? As much as I would love to say yes, we would use you, I think we would want to manage with our own teams and stuff like that from a liability standpoint. We absolutely, it's great to know. I know we have a lot of retired nurses here and folks that can help out or assist with things. And we absolutely will call on folks that if we run into a situation where we might need some help and assistance, it's great to know those folks that have that background. But we will try to manage with our nursing team that's here on site. One of the great parts about living in a community like this is even though we might not have a number of nurses running around in the Gables East and Gables West building, we have that health center right across the street. And I know in the middle of a storm, they're probably not going to run across the street to help somebody out. But right after a storm, they would be readily available to us even before emergency management personnel could get on site here. So we do have a great resource here, and it's wonderful to know that we have additional folks that have that knowledge and expertise and would potentially call upon you if we needed that assistance. But we'll probably manage with our own team first. But it's a great question. Thank you.
So post like on 4, I'm all the way almost down the hall, somebody's having a heart attack. Where can I send somebody to get help if there's no professional people at the other end?
Sure. So during a storm, if we did have somebody that had a true medical emergency, our folks on the floor would know how to get a hold of that nurse in the building or that lead in the building that would be able to locate that nurse in the building. We have, walkie-talkies. We try to get those distributed out so that they know how to get them. We also use our cell phones up until the point that they won't work any longer. But we do have, in each of the buildings, we have the AED machines, and we have folks that are trained and able to use those. The biggest challenge is that, during a storm, unfortunately, even EMS don't respond. If you're in your own home, they're not going to respond to you. So it is a struggle. I will tell you that even in our healthcare center, if we had a true, somebody going into cardiac arrest or something, there'd only be so long that we would be able to maintain without all the proper equipment as a hospital or an ambulance or something like that. So as much as, we will be as prepared as possible. There are some things that we just can't account for. It's a great question. Yes, Dolly.
It doesn't apply to too many people, but those of us that are in the center apartments, if an emergency came when you're supposed to go to the hallways, what side of the fire door should we be on? Stay in the center?
Sure, so great question. So Dolly's apartment is kind of in the middle there. It's before the fire doors. So we really don't need to use those fire doors unless something happens and we have like a window break or something like that. That's the only time that we would actually need to use those fire doors to close them. If something like that happened, we would make sure that we had you moved into a safe location. Usually what will happen in your instance, in particular, they'll probably have you move down the hall a little bit just to be behind those fire doors because it'll get you a little further away from some of those windows in the common area space. It doesn't really become an issue unless we do start to lose some windows in a particular area, and then we'll make sure we get you in a safe spot. All right. Yeah, Bob? Oh, one more. Yeah, we got Bob.
Do you anticipate that the new high impact class will be in by October?
Before October, yes, hopefully. So I'm thinking, and Blue Team has not been able to give me an update yet, but I am thinking that we'll start to see some of those windows going in June, and hopefully we'll get those through by like July, have most of those swapped out. So our goal is to get them. I'd love to see a lot of the stuff happen before August because we know August and September, those are like the 2 bigger months for the bigger size storms coming through. So we'll push them as much as we possibly can. I know from myself and our corporate office, we're really pushing Blue Team to get things completed as quickly as possible. They've been working very quick on the roofing, so that's good to see that they're moving quickly with that. And hopefully we'll get that knocked out quick. But we know that we still have windows and lanais that we want to get rebuilt before we take on any significant storms this year.
Can I follow that with a question?
Mm-hmm.
The new windows at Panoramic is going to fit in the same pane space where the old ones were?
Yep.
Or is there new new structure?
No, so the question is, will the windows fit into the existing opening that's there? Yes, so they got the correct size windows for each window type. So not all the windows are the same size. They had to get the right size measurements for each of the window styles, but they will be the same size. They have those sized appropriately so they can essentially plug and play. Pop them in, screw them into place, seal them, and they should be all set to function. It's that simple. I wish.
I hear you.
Yes, Bobby.
I just wanted to say what a wonderful job I think you all did during the, especially the food. I couldn't believe the meals that we were receiving under those circumstances. You all did a wonderful job.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I will say that the team as a whole, when you have a plan and you execute it and you stay on track with your plan, it works out. Is it perfect? No. And we learn from every storm, right? So we're going to run into issues. I cannot tell you that we will be perfect, but our goal is to make sure everybody stays safe and that we're trying to keep, as comfortable as possible for everybody here. So we'll continue to focus on that. We not only roll this out, I'll get that in a minute. We not only roll this out for our residents to be prepared, but we internally then have our own plan that we're preparing with our, with our staff members. And so our goal is that we are, more prepared, especially now after going through Hurricane Ian so recently. We've learned a lot and we're able to hopefully respond a little bit better in the next storm that comes this way. So hopefully no more. All right, thank you all very much. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy.